tool, as if you saw that lithic demonstration that Dr. Keller did, where he had the blanks. And these, we think, these large pieces, they weren't actually a formal tool in and of themselves. I suppose they could be used that way, but more likely they were for taking flakes off and fashioning other things, projectile points and scrapers and so forth. And what we found farther downstream is that this high-quality lithic raw material occurs in fairly high frequencies at these large village sites. Quartz, which is available everywhere in the Piedmont, is also found, but on the large sites it seems to come in lower quantities, because if you have a choice between using this felsite from the slate belt over quartz, you're going to go for the felsite every time. The smaller sites, and we have excavated only one in any great detail, but it had a much higher frequency of the quartz. And we think that that has something to do with the fact that these blanks that I described are coming into the big villages and then are being redistributed out of those to the smaller villages, so that the large villages have better access to the incoming stone, whereas these smaller groups are having to get it from their neighbors, and so they don't have as free an access to it. Something that we're finding that's very interesting here in Wilkes County that we didn't expect is that we're finding what appear to be small nodules of this high-quality lithic material. So it may be that they're finding this sporadically a little bit closer, and so they're not having to engage as much in this trade. We're not absolutely positive yet. We haven't taken it back to the lab and really studied it, but that's something that we've observed while we've been excavating out here that seems pretty interesting. There isn't much quartz on the site at all in terms of the points or the just waste material from making stone tools. So it seems that they were able somehow to get these different materials, and there seems to be a higher percentage of materials coming in from the Tennessee area here than we see farther downstream at the other sites that we've excavated along the Yadkin. Other things that we know about them is their diet. And we find, as I said, they're agriculturalists, and we have found already at this site a corncob fragment, charred corncob fragment, and lots of corn kernels. So obviously they were growing maize here. I've also seen one bean, which is highly unusual. We haven't seen many at any of the sites that we've excavated. And undoubtedly they were also growing squash and some native seed crops, goosefoot, amaranth, sumpweed. Probably they were eating maypops and just various sort of weedy plants that grow in the area. We also have recovered a lot of deer bone from this site. Not much turkey bone. In fact, I'm not sure I've seen any here, which is a common constituent on other sites that we've excavated. We usually get a lot of turkey bone. Some fish scales have turned up in the flotation, so they were obviously taking fish. And freshwater shell, so apparently they were collecting shellfish as well here. So they had a pretty varied diet. And a lot of, I've noticed in one of the trash pits, a lot of nutshell came out, walnut, hickory, and acorn. And you can imagine that that would be a large part of the diet, probably in the fall when those foods are available.
One consequence of living along these floodplains and using them for cultivating their plants is that the groups of people probably were fairly small because the floodplains are small. If you look at a map of the Yadkin Valley, look at the size of the floodplains or bottoms, you'll see that they're really not very large compared to other major rivers in the southeastern U.S., especially in the Gulf Coastal Plain, where you get enormous, well, the extreme example would be the Mississippi Valley, where floodplain will go for miles and miles and miles across. They'd be that wide. So these small floodplains would only support small groups. And this may be one reason why we don't get very complicated social systems here, involving permanent leaders that build or had their followers build mounds and trade for all sorts of expensive trinkets to hang around their neck to show that this is indeed the supreme leader, etc. These people had a fairly simple social organization as far as we can tell. No one person, family, or group had any permanent leadership position. Everyone seems to have had about the same amount of wealth, at least to start with. Some may have been better hunters and gained a little prestige that way, but no permanent leadership role vested in a lineage, a family, or something of that sort. And those sorts of social systems where you don't get permanent leaders are possible. In fact, there seem to be the norm when you get relatively small groups of people living in face-to-face contact. Anthropologists call them egalitarian societies because everyone is born pretty much equal. And from what we've seen out here in Wilkes County and certainly downstream, that seems to be the sort of social system we're looking at. We're interested in diet and in the way they utilize the environment, because that probably has a lot to do with the sort of social system you ultimately come up with. We see the social system as somehow caused by or created by the way in which you make a living. So that's why we're especially interested in diet and the old environment that they were using. So we spend a lot of time recovering. We're trying to recover bits of charcoal that will, as Rhea said, tell us about the kind of foods they were growing, sorts of animals and plants that they were taking from the local environment. These settlements along the river probably lasted quite a while, long enough for them to build permanent houses, because we find where the posts have rotted out in the ground from the houses they constructed. We see that they're digging storage pits, probably to fill with these seasonal abundances of acorns or hickory nuts or walnuts or their own crops like corn. We find that these pits seem to fall into disuse as storage pits, and then they're filled with ordinary household trash. And when we get to them, we find that they'll appear as a dark smudge when we uncover them, and then as we take out the contents, it usually consists of broken pottery, charcoal, fireplace ashes, bits of burnt walnut, hickory nut, animal bone from the last meal, shell, etc. Just the trash that they accumulate. And these trash pits, we call them. They're, as I mentioned, they're probably not dug for trash, but wind up as that. These trash pits are very, very useful to us because they have been protected from disturbances by plowing. The bottoms along these major rivers like the Yadkin are very heavily cultivated today, and they've been plowed and plowed and plowed for sometimes 200 years. This means that the materials left near the surface have all been churned, broken, and mixed up, but these pits are deep enough so that they have escaped the plowing and they're intact, and they probably were filled quickly. They're dug in sand and they won't last very long, they'll collapse, and the filling of them probably happened certainly within a year, and probably within a few days or weeks. And so the contents of that pit give us a kind of snapshot of what life was like at that particular time, simply by looking at the trash that they were generating. Just the way you could go to someone's house today and learn a lot about them by prowling through their trash cans. That's what we're trying to do here when we excavate these trash pits at the Wilkes County site. They seem to have also buried their dead in the vicinity of the house rather than in a single common cemetery. And that may be telling us something about how they perceived their world at the time. They may have seen that the individual, the deceased individual, was a member of the household more than he or she was a member of the community. In other words, your immediate family may have been your primary social group rather than the larger tribal unit, compared to our own society where people are put into cemeteries. If you ask a person today, who are you? They probably would not answer, well, I'm a Smith or I'm a Jones, but rather I'm an American or I'm a Texan. And that's the sort of allegiance and a social identification that I'm speaking of. And for these Indians, even the way they bury their dead tell us something about how they construct their own social universe in their own minds. So by piecing together bits of information and some speculation, you try and come up with an image of how life was like at that time, and more importantly, why it was the way it was. So that's what we're doing out there, trying to come up with how they lived and why they constructed their culture the way they did.
One thing about the trash pits that we found really helpful, as he was saying, they seem to get filled up very quickly. And in the past few years, we've gotten really interested in the ceramics that these Indians were making. And the trash pits have really been a boon to our work, because we found that we could actually find pieces of pottery from various trash pits that fit together from one pot. And so this enabled us to, by spending hours and days and months piecing together broken pieces of pottery, to link together a lot of these trash pits and to figure out which ones were roughly contemporaneous on a site. So you might find that a site had actually been occupied 2 or 3 times, because you would have one group of trash pits that all seemed to belong together because the pottery was all similar, and then you might have another group perhaps intermingled with the first group of trash pits from another occupation, because all the pots coming out of there were fitting together. And so this led us to begin investigating some of the ceramic changes over the 500-year period that we're interested in. And we think we found some pretty interesting trends in the ceramics. We have found that the pottery generally, well, there are 2 types, we think, and they seem to be 2 types that are made at the same time, which, if you think about it, is not all that unusual. If you think about your own kitchen, you've got metal pots and pans, and you've got plastic Tupperware, and you've got all sorts of microwavable ware, you've got all sorts of different cookware. So it's not a big surprise that the Indians would have different kind of utilitarian pottery as well that they were making at the same time period. And we began trying to link the different types of pottery to possible uses that they might be suited to. And what we think we've found is that these 2 types of pottery, one seems to be designed primarily for storage, and the other seems to be more of a cooking vessel. And over the 500-year period, we think we see that the cooking variety of pottery becomes more and more important. And by that I mean that there's a lot more of it on sites as you go through time. And when I say cooking vessel, I mean that it's got certain thermal characteristics and the thickness of the wall and the way that it's smoothed on the interior so that it will hold water more effectively. So they're maximizing these cooking functions. And as I said, it seems to become more popular over that time period. So we think that what we may be seeing is an intensification of the use of some of these domesticated crop plants, which seems to fit in nicely with some of the other data for example, the Mississippian, which